All right, let's talk about what just happened. Russia launched what their Ministry of Defense is calling a large-scale retaliatory strike. We're talking coordinated precision-guided missiles, attack drones, the whole arsenal. Multiple regions hit simultaneously. Kyiv, Rivne, Mykolaiv, Zaporizhzhia. Air raid sirens across the entire country. And here's what matters, and this wasn't random. This was strategic, calculated, and designed to do one specific thing: cripple Ukraine's ability to sustain its military operations. Now, 3 questions you need answered. First, how does Russia coordinate a strike of this magnitude across so many regions without getting intercepted? Second, what exactly are they targeting and why those targets specifically? And third, does Ukraine actually have the capacity to recover from this, or are we watching the beginning of a strategic collapse? We'll get to all 3. But before any of it makes sense, you need to understand one thing about how modern warfare actually works now. It's not about controlling territory anymore. It's about controlling the infrastructure that keeps an army alive. Fuel, power, transportation. Once those break, the army breaks. Everything else follows. So let's start with the scale. Russia's Ministry of Defense says this operation hit 148 separate districts across Ukraine. That's not a typo. 148. Military airfields, energy infrastructure, fuel depots, transportation hubs. The statement says every objective was achieved, every target was hit. Now, you can't independently verify that claim right now. The fog of war is real, and access to damaged sites is restricted. But here's what we know for certain. Multiple explosions were reported across multiple cities in the same night. That's not coincidence. That's coordination. The weapons mix is important here. Long-range precision missiles launched from air platforms. Ground-based missile systems. Attack drones in substantial numbers. This is a combined arms operation. Why does that matter? Because it forces Ukraine's air defense to respond to threats coming from multiple directions at multiple altitudes simultaneously. You can't defend against everything when everything arrives at once. Air defense systems have limited ammunition, limited coverage radius, limited reaction time. Send 100 drones plus 20 missiles and the math breaks in your favor. The defender runs out of interceptors before the attacker runs out of threats. Let's talk about what they're actually targeting. Military airfields first. Ukraine needs those to operate its air force. Strike the airfields, degrade the runways, damage the aircraft, you reduce Ukraine's aerial capability. Energy infrastructure next. Power plants, substations, transmission lines. Without electricity, you can't pump fuel. You can't charge batteries for communications. You can't run the radar systems that guide your air defense. You can't manufacture ammunition. You can't keep hospitals running. Energy is the backbone. Fuel storage depots. Same logic. No fuel, no vehicles move. No vehicles move, your logistics collapse. Transportation hubs. Railways, roads, bridges. These are the arteries that move supplies from rear areas to the front. Cut the arteries, the body bleeds out. This is what Russian military planners call degradation. You don't have to win every battle. You just have to make it impossible for your enemy to sustain operations. Attrition wins wars when one side can't replace what it loses. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Infrastructure takes time to rebuild. A runway can be repaired in days if you have the resources. But if every repair crew is under fire, if every supply convoy is getting intercepted, if you're constantly patching holes instead of building something new, you fall behind. You fall further behind every single day. Now let's address the operational picture. This strike came at a moment when military activity is intensifying across multiple sectors. Frontline fighting in the east, frontline fighting in the south, both sides preparing for potential summer offensives, both sides trying to gain advantage before the next major push. In that context, infrastructure becomes a weapon. Disrupt your enemy's logistics now, and when they try to launch an offensive in 3 months, they don't have the supplies to sustain it. That's strategic thinking. That's how you fight when you can't win tactically. Ukraine's response has been consistent. They say they retain the ability to continue operations. They emphasize resilience. They point to adaptability. And look, that's not empty rhetoric. Ukraine has proven it can absorb punishment and keep fighting, but there's a difference between resilience and unlimited capacity. Every time you rebuild, you use resources. Every time you rebuild, you divert effort from offensive operations. Every time you rebuild, you're playing defense while your enemy is playing offense. That's a losing position over time. Here's where it gets interesting. The drone component of this operation is significant. Attack drones have fundamentally changed how this war is fought. They're cheaper than missiles. They're more flexible. They can loiter, waiting for targets. They can be launched in massive waves. And air defense systems struggle with them because they're small, they're numerous, and they can come from unexpected angles. Russia has been developing drone tactics for 2 years now. They've learned what works and what doesn't. This operation probably reflects lessons learned from dozens of previous strikes. Meanwhile, Ukraine's air defense has been stretched thin. They've intercepted thousands of drones and missiles since the war began. But interception rates are declining as Russia learns to overwhelm the system. More threats arriving simultaneously means more targets that get through. That's the math. And every interceptor Ukraine uses is an interceptor they don't have tomorrow. Ammunition is finite. Production capacity is limited. Resupply from the West takes time. Eventually, the curve bends. Let's talk about the broader strategic picture. Russia frames this as retaliation for Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory. And yes, Ukraine has conducted strikes inside Russia. They've hit airfields, fuel depots, ammunition storage facilities. They've demonstrated that they can project power beyond their borders. Russia's response is to say, you attack us, we attack you harder. We attack your infrastructure. We make the cost of continuing this war higher than you can sustain. That's the logic of attrition warfare. But here's what most people miss. This isn't just about immediate damage. This is about tempo. Russia is establishing a rhythm of strikes, large operations, coordinated, targeting infrastructure systematically. If they maintain this tempo, and they have the resources to do so, they can degrade Ukrainian capabilities faster than Ukraine can rebuild them. That's the real danger. Not any single strike, the cumulative effect of repeated strikes over weeks and months. Ukrainian authorities activated air raid sirens across large parts of the country. That's become routine now. Millions of Ukrainians spend portions of their day in shelters. That's not just an inconvenience. That's psychological pressure. That's a constant reminder that you're under siege. Siege doesn't require surrounding an army anymore. Siege is when you can strike anywhere, anytime, and your enemy can't stop it. That's what's happening here. Military observers have noted the increasing sophistication of Russian strike packages. They're learning how to combine different weapon systems in ways that maximize damage while minimizing losses. They're learning how to identify high-value targets and hit them with precision. They're learning how to overwhelm air defense through volume and complexity. This isn't a static conflict. Both sides are evolving. Both sides are learning. And Russia has been learning faster in this particular dimension. Now, the critical question, can Ukraine sustain this? Short answer, yes for now. Long answer, it depends on several factors. Western military aid, the capacity of Ukrainian industry to produce ammunition and repair equipment, the morale and determination of the Ukrainian armed forces, the political will of the Ukrainian government and population to continue fighting. But here's the thing about attrition. It's not about capability in a single moment. It's about capability over time. Can Ukraine sustain operations for 6 months under this tempo? Probably, for a year? That becomes harder. For 2 years? That's where the math gets very difficult. Russia has certain advantages in this equation. They have larger stockpiles of missiles and drones. They have more industrial capacity to produce new weapons. They have a larger population to sustain military operations. But they also have constraints. Sanctions limit their ability to source certain components. Their economy is under stress. They can't sustain this tempo indefinitely, but they don't need to. They just need to sustain it longer than Ukraine can. That's the calculation. The energy infrastructure angle is particularly significant. Winter is coming. Ukraine needs heating fuel, electricity, hot water. Damage the power system now, and in December you're not just dealing with military problems. You're dealing with a civilian population suffering from cold, darkness, and lack of basic services. That creates pressure on the government. That creates pressure on the military. That creates an incentive to negotiate. That's the real strategic objective. Not to conquer territory, to make the cost of continuing the war unbearable. But Ukraine has shown remarkable resilience. They've rebuilt infrastructure after previous strikes. They've maintained military operations despite sustained pressure. They've adapted tactics. They've developed new capabilities. So the question isn't whether they can survive this particular strike. They can. The question is whether they can survive a sustained campaign of such strikes. And that's a different question entirely. Here's what's likely to happen next. Russia will probably conduct additional large-scale strikes. They'll continue targeting infrastructure. They'll try to degrade Ukrainian capabilities further. Ukraine will continue defending, rebuilding, and adapting. The front line will remain active. Both sides will suffer casualties. Both sides will seek advantage. And the war will continue in this grinding attritional mode unless something fundamentally changes. What could change the equation? A major breakthrough on the battlefield, a significant shift in Western military aid, a change in the political situation in either country, a negotiated settlement. But absent one of those developments, the trajectory is clear. This is a long war. This is a war of attrition. This is a war where infrastructure becomes a battlefield, and the side that can sustain the damage longer, that can rebuild faster, that can maintain the will to fight, that side wins. Everything else is just the details of how we get there. So, what does this latest strike actually tell us? It tells us Russia still has the capability to conduct large-scale operations. It tells us they're willing to use that capability. It tells us they're thinking strategically about how to degrade Ukrainian capabilities over time. It tells us the war is entering a phase where infrastructure warfare becomes increasingly important. And it tells us Ukraine's resilience is being tested in ways that go beyond traditional military metrics. The coming weeks and months will be crucial. Both sides will be watching casualty figures, damage assessments, and capability degradation. Both sides will be calculating whether they can sustain current operations. Both sides will be preparing for the next phase of the conflict. And civilians across Ukraine will continue living under the shadow of air raid sirens, knowing that at any moment the missiles could come again. That's the reality of modern warfare. That's what happens when infrastructure becomes a weapon. That's what happens when attrition becomes the strategy.